The next version of Apple Podcast will ditch the word subscribe and embrace follow. Major implications for all of podcasting? Yes. But is that a signal that Apple is trying to reset podcasting again? Hello and welcome to another Podcast Pontifications with me, Evo Terra. This morning, James Cridland of Pod News broke the news that Apple iOS 14.5, coming out in just a few weeks, will, on Apple Podcasts, drop the word subscribe. Instead, you will be able to, or at least invited to, sort of maybe, follow. That's what your listeners will have the ability to do. Just follow your show. Well, that's a minor change, but has pretty wide implications. Big implications. I think the implications here are even bigger than when, 5 years ago, Apple told us to stop using the word iTunes in favor of using Apple Podcasts. Yeah, I think it's actually a bigger deal than that. And the big deal is going to be, look, it's all about the new crop of people, right? Everything we should be thinking about in podcasting, well, not everything, but a lot of what we should be thinking about as podcasters is what's the new wave of podcast consumers how will they experience my content? Once, starting in a few weeks, the most likely apps they're going to be able to use, Apple or Spotify, will no longer have the option to subscribe. So, and if you do not change, well, then that's going to lead to some confusion. You're telling people to go subscribe. They're not going to subscribe because there's not an option to subscribe. That big fat purple button that says subscribe is going to be gone. So what will they do? Now, as our friend Tom Webster from Edison Research has pointed out, listeners are turned off by the word subscribe. Potential listeners, when they survey people, they find that a good percentage of people choose not to listen to podcasts because they cost money. But we know that's not the case. And part of that is tied up in our use of the word subscribe, which we've used from the beginning. Now, I've pointed out recently that, was it recently? I think it was sort of recently, that it's a big ask getting someone to commit to your podcast and then putting the word subscribe on top of that. Now, it's been this way for the better part of 17 years. I get it. But still, here's where we live today. Will the changing in language help from subscribe to follow? Will it be more inviting for the new people? Well, I think that's what Apple is primarily doing. But I don't think that maybe is only what they're doing. See, when Apple makes this change, when you see it, if it looks anything like the beta version that I've seen, that big purple subscribe button, it doesn't say follow. It's gone. What it says is, at least for the show I watch, listen to the most recent episode. That's the action they want you to do in the app. Listen to the most recent episode. In fact, the option to follow is up in the upper right-hand corner in the hamburger button. It's not even front and center. Now, again, it's a beta version. It could change, but this is going to release in a couple of weeks, so maybe not. I think they're wanting you to just get in, and they want new people to just get in and listen and absorb the content. So, yeah, you've got to go out and do some work, but thinking about what happens if Apple really truly embraces this idea of follow, the way that social networks have embraced the word follow. I mean, if I follow you, your account, your podcast account on Twitter, your follower count goes up by one, and you probably get a notification. Would Apple Podcasts do something like that? CastBox already does that. You can go to CastBox and see the number of people that are subscribed to your podcast. If I leave a comment on your podcast's Instagram account, or I just, maybe I like your podcast Instagram account or one of the photos that you've shared, you're getting notified. Could Apple do that with Apple Podcasts? Well, maybe. But the thing to remember is, before we go too far down this is going to become a social network, I think you have to remember several things. One of them is the fact that it is not easy to just bolt on some social components to an existing app. And Apple, by the way, has zero experience building social networks. And the last time a company with zero experience building social networks came to play, we got Google+. Remember that? Just me? Yeah. Also, podcast listening is a very passive experience, which is the opposite of social. You can sit and scroll through a social feed. Sure, you can do that. But the podcast apps don't do much, right? I mean, they're reading contents from an RSS feed, and then they're playing it back to someone. There's nothing social in that activity, right? I can't go and create. Listeners, and certainly listeners can't post anything. Or if they do, it's called Anchor. Also, who owns the publishing account for the podcast? I mean, with this huge widespread adoption over the last few years of one-click submit, push this button, and we'll submit your show to every single directory, including Apple Podcasts, how does that information get pushed back? Do they know? Does Apple Podcasts know where to send the notification? Do you have the ability to log in and claim that on your device, on your phone? Or will you just ignore those comments that come in? They're kind of like your old Blogger account. Also, there's the fact that podcast listening is rather commoditized. A podcast app is a lot less like a social app and a lot more like a browser. It's just content someone has put out there that I, the listener, now want to go consume. Right? That's a browser, right? So that's one problem. But also, there are lots of different browsers, these podcast browsers, if you will, podcast media players out there. If they all embrace social and they all start having likes and hearts and follows and comments, do we, the podcaster, have to go follow and claim our show on all of those apps and have 16 to 27 different apps on our phone all the time to respond? Ew! But maybe. So I don't know that I'm ready to assume that Apple is going down the social road, but they might be. They might be. So, makes me curious. One thing I do know, you need to go change your language right now on your website, in your in-app episode details, which you probably still call show notes. Certainly in the audio, embrace the follow. The follow is the way. And also tell your friends that they need to do the same thing. Feel free to send them a link to this episode if that would help them get on the stick and get that done. But by all means, it makes sense to get ahead of the curve right now. Start saying follow. No more subscribe. You should now follow the podcast. Also, if you like the things I had to say, if you were surprised by this, or you think, wow, maybe it is going to be social, go to buymeacoffee.com/evoterra and maybe think about sliding a virtual coffee my way. That's always nice. That's it. I shall be back tomorrow with yet another podcast, Pontifications. Cheers.